I'd like to go ahead and start today's work. This is the Education Committee for the House, and today we have three bills dealing, and this particular meeting right here, dealing with mental health in our schools, and we have another one starting up this afternoon at 1 o'clock dealing with financing special education. So prior to our getting into some notices for the committee here, I do want to introduce a person that's going to be critical and important to our committee here. Karen Davis is standing over by the door. She started yesterday. She will be our administrative assistant. You remember we had Lindsay, and then prior to Lindsay we had Judy, but now we're dating back 14 years. So Karen has been working. She started work yesterday, so she's kind of like OJT still. But we want to welcome you, Karen, and we look forward to working with you. And pardon me? Well, she's taking Lindsay's position, and Lindsay also had a number of other committees. I don't think there's been a whole lot. Karen, what committees are you assigned to? Yeah. And so you can see she's got biggies. And so there's going to be a lot of demand coming her way. So anything we can do to help her out, I'd appreciate, and I'm sure Karen would too. Why don't we go around the table quickly and introduce yourselves just by name, and starting down there, Representative Balboni, and working our way around so that Karen will know we are committee members, and many of us will oftentimes pop down and say, hey, can I get a copy of a certain bill, or et cetera.
Hi, Peggy Balboni, representing Rockingham 38, which is Northampton, Greenland, and Rye.
Representative Corinne Cascadden, representing COAS District 5, City of Berlin.
Representative Valerie McDonald, representing Rockingham District 25, which is Salem.
Representative Katie Peternell, representing Carroll District 6, which is Tuftonboro and Wolfboro.
Patty Cornell, Manchester Ward 11.
Linda Tanner, Sullivan 5, Sunapee, and Springfield.
Dave Luno, Hopkinton and Bow.
Mel Myler, Hopkinton and Bow.
Glenn Cordelli, representing Tuftonboro, Wolfboro, and Ossipee.
Rick Ladd, representative from Haverhill, Piermont, Warren, Landaff. Welcome.
Arlene Cortiello from Atkinson, Rockingham 18.
Kristen Noble, and I represent Bedford.
Muriel Hall, representing Bow and Hopkinton. Welcome.
Good morning. Hope Damon, Sullivan District 8, Ackworth, Langdon, Leominster, Goshen, Washington, Springfield, Sunapee, Croydon, where I live, in Claremont.
You got them all?
Yeah, I got all.
Okay. Art Ellison, Merrimack 28. I represent wards 1, 2, and 3 here in Concord.
Margaret Dry, Sullivan District 7. I live in Plainfield and represent also Cornish, Charlestown, Unity, and Newport.
Good morning again. Rep. Mike Belcher, Carroll District 4 out of Wakefield.
Alicia Lekis, Hillsborough 38, Hudson and Litchfield.
Well, there you have it, Karen. Representative Woodcock's not here, and Representative Ford's not here, but we will give you a test a little later on to know the names and to know all those towns each of us represents. Good luck. So have a wonderful day, and thank you again. Okay, for the committee, I want to give you some dates that we have coming up that you won't see in the calendar just yet. They will be submitted this Wednesday, so you'll get the heads up. I know folks are really trying to schedule a lot of things such as doctor's appointments, visiting with grandkids, babysitting, whatever it might be, all important. So let me go down through some of the bills. Of course, we have today 352, 505, 151, all dealing with mental health. We will have a follow-up meeting to this on October 12th. at 1 o'clock. Now, these are work study groups. We're not taking action during a work study group. All the action on our committee work, whether it be a committee of the whole or a separate subcommittee, will be done later in November too, approximately that. And that's not a solid date yet, but we have to have everything out by the 17th, I believe. So we'll be taking action on all these retained bills, all 20 of them, in November. Going on down, we also have 354, that's the bill which we've been dealing with, charter school building aid and studying overall building aids for the state. That will be the next meeting for that will be scheduled on October 6th at 10 o'clock. So that's 354, October 6th at 10 o'clock. Going on down to other meetings also scheduled on October 6th. And these are all committee, the whole type meetings. So we will all be able to come in and we'll just go through these types of bills one after another, saving some time for travel on you. 147, HB 147 will be also on October 6th at 10 o'clock. We'll just list them all and we'll just take them as we go right through like we are exacting, but we won't be exacting, we'll be just studying. 155, surety indemnification, private post-secondary schools. That's also scheduled for October 6th at 10 o'clock. HB 439, also October 6th. That deals with duty to provide education and contracts with privates. That's at 10 o'clock on October 6th. Going on down further, we have another one, HB 627, Local Education Agency Improvement Plans and Disparities in Education. That will also be on October 6th at 10 o'clock. And lastly, on October 6th at 10 o'clock, SB 25, Charter School Payments. So on October 6th, we will have 6 bills to be scheduled there. Going on down, there's one other meeting which we have. I spoke at when we met last, I think it was last week, when we talked about the ED 306 rules. That will be on October 12th at 10 o'clock. That's where we have Fred Bramante, the ex-chair of the State Board of Education, coming in and presenting the draft rules for 306, the minimum standards for public school approval. That will be on October 12th at 10 o'clock. So on October 12th at 10 o'clock, we will have those rules in the morning, and then in the afternoon, we will follow up with meetings following up on where we are today. Any questions? Yes, Representative Cornell.
Is the presentation by Fred Bramante going to be different than the presentations that he's gone around the state doing?
I hope it's different.
Okay. Because I've done that one.
I did it too. I did it at Concord High School. But there was a lot that he mentioned. In fact, it was really when he was at Concord High School, he spoke to the draft proposal, but there wasn't enough time to get into a thorough discussion on specific points. And there's a lot of different things, competencies, mastery of this, and the elements within the subject areas in 306, that we didn't get into a discussion at all on, which we need to do. And there's other areas as well. So yes, Representative Likas.
Will that be also live for those of us who are out of state to be able to watch it and maybe text some questions to somebody to ask?
It will be a committee whole. We can have that happen. Everything else happens like that. That doesn't seem to be a problem to me.
Okay, good.
So you could tap in that way. But I think it's a good idea if Fred Bramante is going to be here, that we try to make an effort to be here and follow up on each other's questions and delve into it, dive in, because we're coming up. 306 rules are extremely important. And the concept I've always thought of and believe in thoroughly is that state statute drives rules. Rules don't drive state statute. And that's what we got to make sure that the rules are reflective of the intent and the law that we have put in place. So that is all the scheduling which we have to date. There's a lot of other stuff going on, committees and commissions. However, that's not our task here today. So what I'd like to do is get into the three bills which we have down for today at this time. 151, Senate Bill 151, HB 505, and HB 352. 151 is relative to mental health education. 505 is relative to comprehensive mental health education in schools. And 352 relative to excused absences due to a student's mental or behavioral health. Okay. First one, we'll take it as in the order that we had it on the sheet presented to us. So it'd be 352 first. This is relative to excused absences due to a student's mental or behavioral health. And I think that what we ought to do, because we're probably going to overlap in our discussion, there's a lot of, implications that one bill affects another one. So that's good discussion. And so let's, if you're driving home, for example, you say, well, I want to have a definition of mental health. That could be relevant to any one of these bills. And so don't be fearful of not presenting that question or that discussion just because we happen to be something on dealing with absences from school. Okay, 352. Any discussion on it? Yes, Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the surface, there doesn't appear to be anything wrong with the idea of taking a mental health day if that's necessary. And we've heard testimony previously on this, that nothing in current law would prevent a student from taking a mental health day with the approval of parents if that's necessary. My concern is that by explicitly putting this in law, when it's already allowed, it does nothing but perhaps incentivize people toward taking more time away from school. It just doesn't seem necessary. Thank you.
Yes, Representative Cascadden.
I agree with Representative Belcher. When a parent calls that their child is absent, nobody questions why and nobody needs to. I mean, the parent will write a note, my child was sick today. Or if the parent has been working with the school consistently because the child does have a diagnosis, then they're aware of it. And I fear that it opens the door for every teenager who doesn't want to get up in the morning for whatever reason. So I agree.
Wow. Is there any further discussion on this, Representative Patton? No.
I guess my one concern was that what happens after the parent has called in and notified that the child is taking a mental health day? If they called in and said the student had a sore throat, there might not be follow-up. The student appears in school the next day, but I think this might be a flag that the child would be, that the school would be thinking that the child needed further intervention that may or may not be necessary.
Okay, I do have a question for the committee. I'd like to look at number 3 on the bill, which is new language. Students shall not have their grades adversely affected by a lack of class attendance or participation due to mental or behavioral health related excused absences. There are a number of schools, especially high schools, saying that, in fact, my grandkids are attending one right now, not in the state, but you have to be there X number of days to complete that course successfully. Whether you're out for mental health or you're out for a medical reason, if you're out for a medical reason of some kind, you can get a 504 plan and supposedly get some support at home or get it online. But are we giving a really open thing here, which is going to create an issue for an instructor in a classroom to ensure that this student meets the competencies or the academic standards expected from this class? Question. Representative Dry.
That was a good, thank you. That was a good question. I also wanted to just ask if 1 through 4 apply to people with a health absence.
Yes, Representative Myler.
Yeah, I'd like to have our resident superintendent of schools respond to your question. As you look at the issue, I mean, it's one thing to have an incidental, absence. And I think it's quite another, Representative Dry mentioned, you got somebody who has a medical issue that the school is aware of. How, at least in the Berlin school system, how did you handle this kind of, these four issues?
Representative Cascaden, are you willing to take that question?
Thank you. Okay, let me quickly scan these, but every school has a policy already in place about what constitute excused absence, unexcused absence. If there is someone that has a mental health condition under the, is diagnosed by the DSM-IV manual, but they might also have toxic stress, they might also have PTSD, all of those issues, hopefully the parent has worked with the school to engage staffing and support around that student. So then potentially there could be a 504 plan, which is making accommodations under certain circumstances. And that could be the case with a particular situation that has mental or behavioral health that's diagnosed. And then the school supports that with the parent. Let me look to see what else. So it doesn't matter really if it's physical illness or mental health or behavioral health. Accommodations can be made under the circumstances. But it's a team effort. No one person can make those decisions when there's a student that's in trauma.
Can you give me a definition for what is mental health versus behavioral? Because this says mental or behavioral health. Is there a distinct difference there between those two topics? And if so, how are those diagnosed? Are they diagnosed by a professional that the parent is working with, or is the parent diagnosing this?
No, they are two different types of disorders. Somebody with a mental health disorder would be diagnosed by a psychologist or a psychiatrist. It's very specific. And they use the DSM-5 manual, which is the list of mental health disorders. I can't remember the formal title. There are people here that know that title. So if there is someone with a eating disorder, if they're being treated, they could have a mental health issue. Behavioral issue is someone who lives in a toxic environment. The parents are drug users. The kid comes to school, there hasn't been any food. He's going to act out or he's going to be introverted. Somebody who's experienced their house burnt to the ground, they lost everything, that child might experience post-traumatic stress disorder. So then they may act out over that, and they might just look like the naughty kid, but they aren't, because you have to delve deeper into social emotional learning to find out what is going on with these kids. So no longer is the thought, the kid's naughty in school, give them a day of detention. If a school is set up appropriately to be that safe environment, in a trauma-sensitive school, then all kids who have any type of behavior outburst, including a bully, would get some type of scaffolding of support. So I don't separate mental health from a toxic stress. So absences really depend on that team effort. What can that child, I've had kids that haven't been able to come to morning classes for a behavioral or a mental health issue, or an environmental issue that really is creating a struggle. And so alternatives and accommodations for them to access school are made specific for that student.
Are there other questions for the superintendent? Representative Lekes, that's going to you if you're willing to take the question from her.
Did you signal out or make a difference between mental health illnesses and physical illnesses? And why would one be different than the other?
I didn't hear the beginning of your question.
Did you make a difference between mental illnesses and physical illnesses in what you did for the kids?
No. No, depends what the physical illness is. They might have
Thank you.
limitations, they might have capacity issues. So no, it's very
They might have
individual.
Lyme disease.
What?
They might have Lyme disease,
They
which
might.
could be debilitating.
They might, yep. I've had kids that have, they have mono. They
Right,
can't be in
another
school, so you gotta phase that in. You gotta support them at home.
Representative,
Thank
following up to where I think Representative Lucas was, as a prior administrator and principal myself, we had a rule in the district that if you're going to be out 5 days or more, and it's usually up after the 5th day, you had to have a doctor's certificate or some kind of communication from a psychiatrist, which is also that level professional, so that it's not abused, and also to afford the school the opportunity, if that student's going to be out for any extended time, you can go down the route of a 504.
Absolutely.
So is it good to have some qualifying time limits on this? In other words, can a person call in and say, well, I'm going to take a mental health week, and I'm going with my folks down to Myrtle Beach?
Some doctors would write a note to excuse that because they need a mental health week, but don't worry, that kind of stuff is not very secret. I mean, word gets out.
But in your past history, have you had that limitation of X number of days, then the teacher has to receive the note or the reason why the child is sick?
Yes, they have to have so many unexcused days versus excused days. And sometimes it could take a long time to add up unexcused days, and then you require a doctor's note.
Yeah. Yes, Representative Damon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a comment and a couple questions. So the DSM that Representative Cascadden referred to, just to clarifying that for folks who might not know, is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's in its 5th edition, and it's basically the Bible of diagnosis of mental health conditions that's used by all healthcare professionals. It's very standardized and respected. So a question, it's a long time since my kids were in school, and they happily weren't ill much in either way, physical or mental. Currently, if a parent calls to inform that their student will not be in school, do they have to state a reason?
No, they have to submit.
So follow up.
Yeah.
So then the written note would need to state a reason? Like, what I'm asking is, can a parent simply call and say, Jane will not be in school today, she's not well, without being any further specific than that? Or do they need to be more specific?
When I was a principal, that was fine.
Yep.
For the parent calling, in fact, we wanted that to occur. But when it went longer, beyond that 5-day period, then we had to, get more specific. And that's where we were asking for the recommendation or the statement from the MD or the counselor or whomever it might be.
One more follow-up.
Yes.
So if there was the 5-day absence and therefore the medical or psychiatric note needed, if for whatever reason the family and or student does not want to share the diagnosis or the concern, can that note simply say, Dr. Smith affirms that this student was not well enough to attend school for these days?
As a principal, I was never going to question the professional statement written by MD. That's not my bailiwick, So I wouldn't question, if I had a note from the physician stating, they scribble something down on a pad of paper, you can't read it anyways. And that's, for me, that was good enough. We knew that there had been a diagnosis by a professional, not just either mom or dad or brother or sister. I don't know if that's where you were, Representative Cascadden.
Yes, you don't question it and with a doctor's note. The only thing is you always had a small pool of kids who were habitually absent. And either the family or the child had a connection in the school, so they didn't have to explain to everybody. Maybe it's just the school nurse, maybe it's just the school psychologist. But people within the institution would take their word for it without needing to know any details, because some parents don't want that. There are very few times that there are truancy cases that are not masking behavioral health or some poor environmental situation. I've been to more houses to get kids in the morning from when I was a principal and a superintendent, and it's truly an eye-opener.
Yeah, I visited too, and I've been welcomed with a person with a rifle in their hand. But, in the case, for example, we had years and years ago, we had a bill in here on concussion injury, and we had folks from the NFL testifying, as well as a young lady who had been in college in Massachusetts, had a concussion and had to be home in a dark area until this was healed. In that particular case, you get the letter from the statement from the physician, but that's when you also take action at school and saying, how can we help? How can we establish now the 504 plan?
Yep.
And get going on this. So that's why I think it's necessary to get something from the doctor in case if it's going to be an extended period of time, then it takes some time to get the person to go to, to hire somebody to take care of that 504.
Yep.
Yes, Representative Balboni.
This goes to exactly what you were talking about. I just pulled up SEU 50's policy. And it states essentially what you were saying. I think all districts are required to have a policy, and it includes the definition of excused absences. It details, it talks about after 5 days, they'll look into it, and it gives, so it's very detailed, laid out in what the expectations are for the school district.
Further discussion, Representative Hall.
Thank you. Is there from school to school district, I realize everyone has to have a policy, but from school district to school district, does it vary a whole lot? Like, what if a school district said 5 days and particularly high school, because you got graduation that they're thinking about, whereas the other schools not so much?
The graduation degree is issued by that high school diploma. And of course, they set all the boundaries, parameters for issuing that diploma. So I don't want to be subjective and answer that. I can't, because I don't know exactly what's going on throughout the state in this regard. Representative Tanner. No, excuse me, Representative Cordelli first. He had his hand up, and then Representative Tanner.
Thank you. It seems to me with this legislation, it would require a third category. You'd have excused, unexcused, or mental behavioral health reasons for absences. Because with this, it would seem that you have to track the number of mental health, behavioral health days that they're absent, because you want to make sure that it's not affecting their grading or anything else. And it also opens the door, as Representative Petronell said, for the school to start raising questions. And it doesn't have to be 5 consecutive days. It could be, a couple of days here, a couple of days next month, that the reason is, quote, mental health or behavioral health. So I think this, for me, this opens doors that I'm not sure I would want to go down.
Representative Tanner?
So, like Representative Balboni, I looked up my district's absentee policy, and it's the same thing, five 5 days, and then there's some notification. But it also has various categories for excused and unexcused absences. And one of the excused is personal illness, and in quotation marks, it has mental or physical. So I think most of the schools are aware of that. I know we had students that had, in the dark ages when I was teaching, had mental illnesses. You would probably describe them as that, or even eating disorders that we knew that they were working with the school and they missed a number of days. And a lot of times if the material couldn't be sent home and effectively done for teaching, they actually hired a tutor to go to the house under a 504 plan. So.
Further discussion, Representative Myler?
And clearly, the issue of student mental health has been brought to our attention and has been all over the news. So we know that this is an issue. And we've also heard that school districts have, in fact, policies that cover this. And I was looking at a couple of the letters that we received supporting this particular bill. And what I'm trying to figure out, what is the intent behind the bill? I mean, whenever I look at a bill like this, I always want to know, why is this being proposed when it appears that there are already safeguards within school districts, et cetera, with policies, et cetera. I mean, clearly we want to be able to protect the mental health of students, et cetera. But when I look at a bill like this with all the safeguards we've just heard about, I'm looking at what is the intent?
Maybe we can get an answer from that. If you look at the prime sponsor and the co-sponsors of this legislation, the prime sponsor's in the room.
If that would be great.
Representative Alexander, are you willing to come forward and try to respond to what was your intent or rationale behind submitting this?
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. House Education, Mr. Chair, for the record, my name is Representative Alexander. I represent the town of Goffstown. The intent of this bill is to provide a flag and create communication between parents and the school district and the students. So when we talk about mental health or mental illness, it might just be one day I'm not feeling well, like I woke up and I just was not feeling well. And it could be not anything diagnosed by a doctor or anything, but a student that might need that a little extra support. And if this is flagged for the school district and the school district knows and the parent calls in and says, my child's taking a day off, maybe the school district can keep a closer eye on that child, make sure that they're getting the support that they need. I've heard from multiple parents that sometimes students fall through the cracks, and we just want to make sure that we're creating a system where there's more communication between the parent and school district, especially if their child needs extra help.
So let me follow up and then Representative Petronell. On item number 4 here, the student shall be considered present by their school during the excused absence. If you're declaring that they are present, but they may have an excused absence because it's a mental health issue, is the school now, because they're present, responsible for providing that 1 day or 2 day that student's out, the activities, which are the academic classwork that's being presented? Is that, we oftentimes, when a kid was absent, the teacher would follow that up maybe that evening saying, hey, here's some things which we're doing. You could be reading this, you could be doing a spelling lesson if it's a grade school kid, etc. Are they required now by saying, you are present, so we're going to hold you accountable for what was taught during that day?
Well, I think it's pretty vital that the school gives the opportunity for the student to make up that work. But this language, and Martha Dickey's here too, and she came up, it was from other states that this language came from, various different states. So I'm leaving, honestly, the language up to the committee. I'm happy to come back with language that addresses doctor's note, non-doctor's note, but I just want to make sure that the intent of the bill is to protect the student and create more communication on mental or behavioral health problems.
Thank you. Representative Petronell?
I'm just confused about that, because if there's open communication between the parents and the school, shouldn't the parents already feel comfortable contacting the school and say, my child might have some mental health issues and I need some help dealing with that. Do you think you could offer some suggestions? Again, as Representative Myler said, I'm a little confused as to what the actual intent is and why this bill is truly necessary, because it does seem like we have a lot of safeguards for the students already in place.
The idea is, thank you for the question. The idea is that the parent would call and say, can you please keep a closer eye on my child? But I think that by taking that mental health day there, it's kind of like an unsaid thing that maybe they might need that extra support. So, a student might go to their parent and say, I'd like to take the day off. And the parent might not ask any more questions and they just say, I need to take a mental health day. And then it's just something for the school to follow up with later at some point. I know the committee's job is to overthink, but I don't want the committee to overthink. So the language itself in here does not bother me how it's changed. I just like at least the state being like, we're going to allow a mental health day, give support to those students, allow for more communication with administration and teachers and guidance counselors, and make sure that we're protecting all of them.
Representative Cornell?
I guess if we're going to put something like that in, I would almost like to put part of the burden on the parent to say the parent will contact the school guidance counselor or the principal, rather than when they call in, it's the secretary who's not only giving everybody admit slips, but answering the phone, and that will get lost. Quite honestly, if there's one secretary doing all of that, and then to expect the secretary to pass along the word to a guidance counselor in a school, say, of Central High School with 2,000 students, to pass it along to the guidance counselor, oh, so-and-so's mother called them in today and said that they were having a rough day. That's leaving a lot to chance, I think. So almost to say, if it's a personal thing like that, get in touch with someone in the school who can respond better. But also I want to bring up Manchester for an excusing. The principal or his designee shall determine if the absence is excused for good cause for any other reason not listed above. Which means in that case, the parent may already have been in contact with somebody and they know what's going on. I just don't want it left to chance. If that's going to be the issue, let's not leave it to chance of whoever's answering the phone, or if there's an answering machine in some schools for calling out.
Representative Cascadden?
Just to add, if you're from Goffstown High School is a PBIS school. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's positive supports and behavioral interventions, and it functions on a 3-tier framework process, so that kids who need support, whether it's mental health or behavioral health, would be part of that structure. But now that's not saying they're going to know every single student, but it is designed so that there's a coach that does get to know every single student. So they do have that model. I don't know how well it's working, but part of the intent of that whole school structure is to help and support those kids.
Representative Tanner?
Thank you. And kind of in terms of overthinking something.
Are you needing to talk to the representative further? No, we can have him sit down.
Oh, okay.
Is there something for him?
Not necessarily.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions directly for this man right here? Not seeing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Alexander. Okay, go ahead.
So this particular bill was set in 189:34, which my book, I noticed, kind of open to that it has a section in it, a definition of excused absence and a process for considering exceptions to absences not otherwise excused is one of the parts for the school board policies. And the second part of it is a process for intervention designed to address individual cases of truancy as quickly as possible. And I think we're getting into the details that maybe belong at the local district level, and certainly from the different schools that we've looked up already, they are following this policy to have definitions of excuse policies, to have a process of intervention as prescribed in the statutes. And I don't think we need to go into the detail that's in this particular bill. I mean, I think it's something in New Hampshire we already have in statute.
And follow up to that, Representative Tanner, I know that many of the schools, if you don't call in, you get a call from them. And I've gotten that many a time. In fact, I could have taken a mental health day today. The Carolina Panthers got beat. And I was watching that game and I was a little bit disgusted because I was hoping that their quarterback would do something. So is that a mental health day? I don't know. But you don't want to respond to that. Representative Cordiello.
Yeah, I just have a comment. Representative Alexander had mentioned this, I think a flag, the word flag, sending up a flag. And as we all know, mental illness does have a stigma. And I'm concerned that there will be parents who do not want this flag sent up. And so the children in most need might be those parents in denial who don't want to have this be open to, or for any reason, maybe they just want to maintain their privacy, but that they don't want that flag sent up, and that a lot of children who are most need of help will not benefit. I'm just having a really hard time seeing why we need this. So I just wanted to put my opinion in there.
Further discussion from the committee here? Now, okay, I don't see any more hands up on this. Is there a need for us to, to have the legislation as it is? Is there a need to modify it maybe? Then we get into some of the policy decision-making of the local school district, like should it be due to a diagnosed mental health, behavioral health, or that's the diagnosis is something you want after the 5-day period. You wouldn't have that. It's just like a medical sore throat or the flu. You're out, and that's excused. So I guess I'm asking, is there a need for defining anything in here more so, or clearing up any language, or is there even a need for the bill? So Representative Cascade and then Representative Dry.
Are we able to ITL this bill?
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, yes, we would recommend ITL, and that would go to the floor.
Okay.
But we will be doing all that in November.
Right.
Yeah. Representative Dry?
Thank you. I'm thinking that 2A that's in here right now, with a definition of excuse absence and a process for considering exceptions, and it's not even limited to that. I mean, that's a very broad statement, 2 and 2A. I think it covers everything that we were talking about, and I agree with Representative Tanner that this is probably best left at the policy level.
Any further discussion? Because if we're saying that as a majority of people, that this is left better for leaving it the way it is in law, we don't have to have any more committee of the whole on this bill. We would basically understand where we're going with in November. If not, we continue to list it when we meet. Representative Damon.
So I think I have a different point of view on this bill than much of what has been expressed, and I'm not entirely sure how to effectively articulate it. I particularly think number 1, lines 4 through 6 in the draft language is important. It's just not clear to me, given what has been acknowledged about stigma around mental health and behavioral health issues, and I think our broad acceptance that students today have a high incidence of some of those conditions. It's not clear to me that our students and families always know that it is an acceptable thing to stay home for these reasons and repair yourself, basically. I was looking at the testimony that New Futures submitted when we originally heard this bill. And if I could, there's in their last paragraph supporting it, it reads as follows. Allowing for mental health absences removes some of the stigma associated with having a mental health challenge. And I think that is part of the intent of this bill. Additionally, it ensures that students are not penalized for having a mental health challenge, just as they wouldn't be penalized for being physically ill. Excusing absences for mental health ensures that young people can take the time needed to tend to their well-being, which can help minimize additional symptoms and give students time to seek the help they need. So I just kind of wanted to make that statement that I think there's some merit to at least part of this bill. Thank you.
When the student returns to school, they're going to have some kind of a note or from the parent, or else it's going to go down as an unexcused absence. The only way you're going to have it as an excused absence is if there's a note from the parent or guardian. Is that correct? I'm asking anybody on the committee here.
3 days. You have to have a note if you're out for more than 3 days, according to the policy here. There has to be a written note submitted by the parent.
So what happens in those schools which say if you have so many unexcused days, you get either dropped a grade level or something occurs? I know that for a fact in a school where my grandkids are going around. It's over 1,000 kids in the school.
According to this, after 5 days of unexcused absences, the principal will begin an intervention with the student's parents, guardians, and other staff members as may be deemed necessary. And then it goes through a list of what the intervention should involve.
So if it's less than 5, how do we know the kid's not playing hooky? Is there no note that comes in for that day of absence? How does the parent know the kid did not go to school? That happened with number 1 right here, where I didn't go to school. And I showed up with the RCMP bringing me to school. And so that didn't go over well with my dad.
3 days.
That's why most schools did callback.
That's why there has to be some kind of communication, even on 1 day of absence.
Right.
It's also a safety issue. Where's the kid?
Right. I mean, maybe something happened if he was a walker. I mean, you got to get in your car and go look.
Yeah.
Right? I think we don't give schools enough credit for dealing with this. I mean, mental health is not new. Schools have had to deal with it as far back as 10 years, 15 years, where they had to start putting in structures within the system to be able to open to not shunning kids who are having mental health or behavioral health issues.
So I think what we'll do, because we have about 2 other bills, and I want to get them this morning as well. There has been some difference in opinion here on this. I want everybody just to think about this as we're going through the other 2 bills and reflect back, is this something we need or we don't need, or we need with some changing language in it? And we can put it on the docket for the next time we meet and try to, put it to bed at that time. Is that okay with everybody?
Rick, can I add something to that? Thanks. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I know I was out for a few minutes, but I believe Representative Tanner talked a little bit about the section that this is in, 18934, which is truant officers. And I think maybe a lot of people think that maybe, truancy or truant officers is something from a bygone day. I don't recall during my 12 years on a school board that we ever approved or appointed truant officers in the Hopkins school districts. But I think something that has been discussed as a concern of this committee, and I don't think we've done much on this, is the precipitous drop in ADMR, ADMA, whichever one you want to call it, statewide, from about 165,000 K-12 students to now about 158,000. And it didn't happen as a result of the 1-ish% decline that we've seen over the last couple decades. It came very abruptly during and following COVID, and it hasn't really rebounded. and there seems to be somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000 students that may be impacted on this, that our school districts probably would have had enrolled, but we haven't seen, we don't know where these kids are. They're not in public schools, they're not in private schools, they're not in homeschool census, they're not part of the EFA program. None of the other numbers have sort of gone up with to make up for this out of trend drop in enrollment. So I just sort of put it out there, Mr. Chair, that this section. So I'll put it out there. This section could be used by this committee to be amended and maybe request the Department of Education to report out on what's happened with these 5,000-6,000 students that are no longer enrolled in our public schools and don't appear to be enrolled in any other educational setting, including EFAs, including charters, including homeschool settings. And I know it's different than the purpose of the bill, but it might be a useful purpose in this section. But I just sort of put it out there because I don't want this committee to lose the fact that that we've seen a precipitous COVID-related decline that has not bounced back. Where are these students? Because we do have a constitutional obligation to provide a adequate opportunity for an adequate education for them.
Okay, so what we will do is we'll bounce into the other two here, but I would suggest that if you have a desire to possibly amend this or delete part of this, whatever you may, or there might be some saying, I don't want it, that's fine. But if you want to try to put some bullets down that we can share when you come next time, if an amendment has to be made, we can address those, write down the numbers here, and then come out with something possibly towards the latter part of the meeting. A lot of good discussion here on that, and it's related to the next bills which are coming up here. So with that, let's get into 505, relative to comprehensive mental health education in schools. What I want to do for everybody here, I'm going to pass out to you the curriculum we have for health education framework, the copy of which has been approved by the State Board of Education, albeit back in 2003. But it's the most recent. I'm also going to hand out to everybody a copy of the 8306 40 rules here, which I did last time. Hand that out. Also, I got a report here back from the Department of Education on a report on health and physical education curriculum in the schools, what's being taught or what's not being taught. It's a survey of all the school districts in the state. I'm also passing out to you the TEA school, Texas Education Agency, DOE Texas. They have a mental health program as well, and they define what a comprehensive school mental health program is in this legislation they have. And just hopefully I'm splitting these things up right so everybody can have a copy. And lastly, for your feedback here, here's, I took this off the web the other night, dealing with resiliency and mental health resources available for schools in Florida. If anybody doesn't get a copy, let me know and we'll see if we can balance it out. Should be enough.
I put extras here for.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. And lastly, there's a form here which is put together by Jennifer Four, responding to that survey that was put out to schools. And it's kind of like a synopsis of who said yes, who said no. Are there any extras on that one over there? That's the one from Florida? Okay. Okay, once again, HB 505, relative comprehensive mental health education in schools. Okay, we have a lot of paperwork in front. Just for you can all scan through the health education curriculum guidelines, which we have in the state, which also state and address mental health education. ED 306 has a specific area where mental health is identified as an element within the health program. That's ED 306.40. And then the other sheets which came out, this one right here is the survey sheet, which was done of all the school districts as an annual thing, which is done in terms of, are you addressing these issues which we have in statute, being physiology, hygiene, health education as it relates to effects of alcohol and drugs, physical. Well, there you go. Now it's about DOE certification. Or maybe even something else, who knows? Going on across there, physical education as it relates to effects of alcohol and drugs, child abuse, human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, acquired, and AIDS, and sexually transmitted disease, whether those things are being taught in schools or not. It's kind of interesting what she found out. There's some schools that are not doing that. And then, of course, the sheets from Texas and Florida. I think that's all that I handed out to you. So it's open to discussion right now on this bill 505 dealing with the comprehensive mental health. Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also took the liberty of providing some handouts that I'd like to go through real quick to, I think, get a better grasp of what we're looking at and what we may be looking at here. Don't worry, we're not going to go through all of it. You're welcome to read it all head to toe on your own. We're just going to hit some highlights. So we didn't get a lot of real firm information as to the full scope of what constitutes comprehensive or even just regular mental health education. So I figured one of the best places to look at where we might be headed would be to go to the School Counselors Association. This is the professional organization that sets the standards and ethics guidelines for school counselors who provide mental health services in schools. First handout, labeled with the one on top, identifies one such core directive of their association to be embrace their role as social justice advocates and change agents. In developing this particular position statement, they cite a number of resources which are on the back page, including Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. Moving on to the second handout, we have an article from eSchool News, a popular online website for school news and information, written by the Director of Behavioral Health for Hazel Health regarding expanding mental health and health services in schools, wherein they specifically talk about providing students access to confidential health care. They cite mental health symptoms. They particularly would like to bring in confidential telehealth services for students. They cite that they may not be receiving enough or any support from parents or guardians. In other words, they must go around them to provide these health services at school. Moving on to the third handout, also from the American School Counselors Association. I believe this one's even more important than the first one, because this identifies the standards that they have developed, the competencies for students under their care. There's a lot of stuff you can look through here. I've highlighted a number of things. Not everything highlighted is necessarily bad or anything. A lot of it's just interesting. It's stuff worth looking more into. But I would like to direct your attention to the lower right-hand corner of the second page. It should be on the back. BSS 10, Cultural Awareness, Sensitivity, and Responsiveness. Now, if you go through the rest of this document, there will be a lot of other references to that specific item. So what is cultural awareness, sensitivity, and responsiveness? Bringing us to the fourth handout from the publication Ed Week, one of the most preeminent education publications. What is culturally responsive teaching? Again, you're free to go through this top to bottom on your own. We're just going to look at a couple highlights. On the, let's see here, second page, so on the back, it identifies that a number of states have passed legislation seeking to prohibit the teaching of critical race theory in schools, and it notes that that does in fact affect this culturally responsive teaching. Going on to the next page, it identifies the start of culturally responsive teaching as being the work of Gloria Ladson Billings, the author of the book Toward a Critical Race Theory of Education. It further identifies that this concept seeks to accept and affirm the cultural identity while developing critical perspectives. All in all, what this appears to be is teaching students to identify by race and class and other characteristics. Moving on again to the next page at the top, it specifically identifies critical consciousness as one of the core competencies of this or culturally relevant teaching. Critical consciousness derives from critical theory, which was the work of neo-Marxist Horkheimer in his book Traditional versus Critical Theories, written in the 1930s. Moving on lower in the page, we see that this particular competency they're pushing, it divides people up on racial and ethnic groups, and it assumes that people have different cultures and traditions within America based on the color of their skin, and that they need to teach to that. Moving on even further to the next page, we see that culturally responsive teachers must also consider the student's gender, age, socioeconomic status, where they live, etc. This is intersectional theory. Kimberly Crenshaw, in her relatively famous paper, Mapping the Margins. Finally, on the last page, at the very bottom, we identify, for instance, students in high school math class could learn about statistics by assessing the probabilities of racial profiling cases in various neighborhoods, or using other data sets applicable to their communities that bring up questions about justice and injustice. This is talking about hijacking the curriculum for social justice ends. This is directly out of the playbook of a gentleman named Paulo Freire. His book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which has unbelievably become one of the most popular books. Handout 5 is just further clarification on exactly where this theory and ideas come from. And further evidence on page 6 out of the University of California, Fresno. We have heard about WISE compassionate framework before. This is a term that's come up a number of different times. WISE compassionate framework in teaching health education in schools embodies critical race theory. Multi-tiered systems to support whole school, whole community model. Trauma-informed practices, social justice responsibility, and evidence-based research. So I think this really gives us a little bit of an idea of where the door to mental health education of students is open to, particularly from the closest current professional association being the Student Counselors Association. Thank you.
You have a question, Representative Cordelli?
Thank you. I will take a closer look at the school counselor information, but perhaps you can explain how the rest of these documents, like the culturally responsive teaching, is related to the legislation that we are discussing.
Well, I think before we get into another, 25 minutes and trying to find all that, I think we need to stick to the topic, which is there's 3 words that have been, or 4 that have been put into this legislation: comprehensive mental health education. That's it, underneath studies. So I'd rather not get into that right now, and I'd like to try to get, when we initially had this bill here, there was a concern, do we call this comprehensive mental health education or mental health education? Then we saw mental health written in ED 306. It's also within the frameworks which we're required to be teaching right now. The reason why you see the what they've done in Texas before you, at the bottom of that first page, it gives a definition as to what comprehensive mental health is. And this is coming out of a pretty conservative state. And you can see that it says comprehensive school mental health systems provide a continuum of services and supports intended to, and you see the bullets in the back page, promote a positive school climate, teach and support skills for social, emotional, and behavioral health, prevent mental health and substance use problems, intervene early to reduce the severity of mental health concerns, and the last one, provide access to school-based and community-based interventions and supports to students and families. And you get down a little lower, they talk about the MTSS, which is the multi-tiered system of support, which I think we have something very similar to that operating in our state right now. So that's their definition, and I'd like to stay, somewhere along the ballpark of what I just read, because that seems to me is what we're dealing with. And in my discussions with many superintendents now, there appears to be a need for looking at mental health or comprehensive mental health and the conditions the students are coming to school in right now, and some of the really issues in the classroom that teachers are having to address and deal with. So, Representative Damon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you particularly for framing the discussion around what this bill proposes to do, which is mental health education. I would very respectfully ask my colleagues to carefully distinguish between education and treatment. They are not the same thing. That would be true whether we were talking about physical health, mental health, or whatever. I see this bill as a necessary statement of requiring that we educate our students about conditions of mental health so that they learn protective factors, risk factors, and where help would be available should they or folks they know need it. It is not about providing treatment. That's part of mental health system, but it's not education. If I parallel it to a physical condition, if we teach students what diabetes is, what symptoms would suggest that you might want to get evaluated for diabetes, we're not treating them. If they do turn out to have diabetes, they will be treated in the healthcare system. Similarly, if we teach students what the warning signs of depression or anxiety disorder are, we're not treating them, we're informing them that these conditions exist and that because they're common, it is part of their education to be aware of them and informed for future reference. So I really urge people, try diligently, please, to distinguish between education and treatment. This bill does not propose that schools be treating mental health. It proposes that we be educating about it. Thank you.
Representative Luna.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks for getting us back on track on here. And I think Representative Damon said it very well. some of your remarks, Rick and Hope, reminded me of a speaker that many of us, I think, may have heard last summer at CSG East, which was hosted in Manchester. And they had a speaker who's the president of Bank of America, based out of Connecticut, and he was really up there to speak about internships and workforce development, and he said, "But I'll tell you, and this is a room full of legislators from across the country, including a lot from New Hampshire." And he goes, "I'll tell you, the biggest thing we're concerned that we're seeing among interns that we take, out of high school is mental health." And he said it has dropped on us like a ton of bricks right now, and it's not something that had really been on their radar screen several years ago, but absolutely was as an employer, as a someone that supervises interns in their business, and again, the president of Bank of New Hampshire, and he said, please do something about bringing this to light in your public schools and talking about it and eliminating the stigma about it, so that people could get the help that they need.
Well, that's old fashioned, isn't it? Representative Tanner.
Thank you. I'm just asking a question about the bill as it's written, and looking at the page that you handed out with 189:10 studies. There's a lot more in 189:10 than is in this first and second paragraph. Are we proposing to change this particular 189:10 sections 1 and 2, and actually they have a section 3, by eliminating those and just inserting this? Is that the intention of this law, of this particular?
I think the way this is written, Representative Tanner, is that it's just adding to that Roman 2 the 4 words, comprehensive mental health education, and not doing anything to any other statute or legislation that's in place. There's no other changes. There's no deletion of other Roman numerals which might appear. I don't have that law in front of me. I'm looking at just in the back.
Yeah, there's a section 3 with the personal financial literacy.
Yeah, that remains there. That doesn't go anywhere.
And then it has the 306 rules, which, are the course in high school that I taught in health was a quarter credit. It was, 1 marking period for, 45 minutes a day, 5 days. And to actually achieve all these things would be very difficult, although they're all integrated. Everything's kind of integrated in itself, like physiology can't be separated from what you're teaching when you're teaching health, but, or PE, but, even in the 306 rules, it actually, under part 2G, it has mental health. So, it isn't that we aren't doing it already. I just think these bills are pointing out that we have a mental health crisis with kids, and we're all aware of that, and I think schools are extremely aware of it now, as are the communities, and I appreciate the fact that people are putting in bills to try to highlight it, but it's already there. So.
Yes, it definitely is already identified in a number of places. Go ahead. No, Representative Petronello, you haven't spoken yet on this one. And then Representative Cascadden.
Thank you. Am I correct? This health education curriculum guidelines is from 2003,
Yes.
so it's 20 years old.
Yeah, and our social
And-
studies was written in 2006, so it's
On-
just about as old.
Well, our second page, it says page 5. Number 1 is health education. And if you go down to the second line, well, I'll read it. A planned sequential K through 12 program that addresses the physical, mental, emotional, and social dimensions of health. And then go down further, reduce health-related risk behaviors. I would say we've been covering this at least for 20 years, so I'm kind of questioning the necessity of this particular bill.
Yeah, and then if you look internally, you'll find a whole section on mental health within it.
Just to that point.
Representative Cascadden had, and then Representative Cordelli.
Thank you. The language in this bill, the words comprehensive and education make me nervous because it gives the perception now that there'll be specific learning of mental health or for mental health students. I don't understand why we just don't have mental health like we do. I think we have it in the law, or we have it identified already in the 306s. But this work, schools have recognized that this is an issue quite a while ago because there have been initiatives through this Office of Wellness, which came about because of some of this. 10 years ago, again, schools went to positive behavioral intervention supports. There was Project Aware that was building resilience among kids. The thing is, the school should not be perceived as the place that's going to cure someone with a mental health disorder. It needs to be one piece of the puzzle because a child will spend 5 or 6 hours there. So behavior is important. There has to be a connection in a relationship with community health, physical health, mental health professionals in the community or in the region, but there has to be a continuum of services. And it's not just the school. And I fear that because this now comes as a new bill, the schools now need to take on curing mental health issues. And it really should not be separated out again as a mental health issue because kids come to school with other emotional and behavioral issues. And some students have their mental health very well under control. So I don't like separating that out. I think that puts labels on kids. The other piece is, I lost my train of thought. Schools have gone from detentions to student support centers in their schools, which is part of the structure that if a student needs a timeout, he might go to a student support center. I'd be curious to know, maybe the Office of Wellness, at the DOE can find out how many schools already have a multi-tiered systems of support for emotional, behavioral, and mental health conditions. But I think if there's any language, comprehensive and education should come out because it's already being done. And to what extent should the school be dealing with mental health? I mean, it's not in their purview to sort of change that. It's their responsibility to make sure that the student is safe in a learning environment. And so it's a different picture. But I think the curriculum and the education about it is already there in the health curriculum. But one piece that I can remember adding was training staff and being able to recognize mental health disorders. And that was through the training of all staff in youth mental health first aid, just like you train everybody annual in bullying. You train everybody annually in some other requirements. But I think that would be a key factor to add to at least train all staff people in recognizing that so that they can refer, students and help the student, but not cure it. It's not their job.
Representative
I
Cordelli.
completely agree with Representative Cascadden on that, on the staff being trained better. I have a family member with a mental illness. If I thought for a minute that this sort of thing would have helped her with her situation, I'd be all for it, but I don't think it would have. And we're already apparently we're already addressing these issues. I don't like this phrase, comprehensive mental health education, either. I want to thank Representative Belcher for these handouts, which are relevant. He brings up very complicated issues regarding Marxist ideology. And the fact the American School Counselor Association seems to express some concerning terms, that sends up a flag for me. I feel like putting this phrase in here, comprehensive mental health education, opens a door to an association like this, bringing that ideology into the schools. I've seen it in the libraries with the American Library Association with their Marxist ideology. So that's what concerns me. That is all.
Just follow up and then.
Just a quick one. I mean, you had some examples here from Texas and Florida, but I would suggest people look at Massachusetts. And their statute requires all schools to have, they call it a safe and supportive environment. And then there are specific guidelines that all schools must follow to be able to help students who have mental health disorders, who have been traumatized. There's a lot of research on trauma-sensitive schools using the ACEs to be able to identify and support kids. So just another resource that I think would be strongly.
But isn't that in conjunction with MTSS, which
It
is
is.
a multi-tiered system?
It is.
Where it might not be part of tier one, but you get into those other levels where you're
Yep.
dealing now with the professionals, not the school district. We're not asking a teacher to be a professional. And I think that's, when I initially heard that, I said, whoa, all of a sudden we're going to make, our teachers psychiatrists, the MD type level, or even a psychologist or a counselor. And that's, that's not their job. So I feel that part of this is also on training of our teachers to know how to deal with issues. And that's why I put forth the issue dealing with the information that came out of Florida. And on page, at the back of that whole litany of stuff there, on pages 10 and 11, there's underlined there. And one of without not going through and reading it all, it talks about expanding school-based mental health care, training educators and other staff in detecting and responding to mental health issues, and connecting children, youth, and families who may experience behavioral health issues with appropriate services. So the school is not going to be necessarily that service. It's, like when I was a principal, I had community mental health housed in my building.
Right.
And we worked jointly together, and it worked miracles.
Right. There's nothing that prevents a provider from coming on site.
Representative Cordelli.
Thank you. I'd like to go back a little bit. We're talking about the frameworks, and I just point out that mental health, as was mentioned, is included in here, but also broken down by elementary, middle, and high school sections, which I think is important. And I was not here for the last session of this on these bills, but I watched much of the video, and one thing that struck me, someone mentioned, are we contributing to the problem? And I think that can't be dismissed either. I've got articles here. Does high school cause teen depression? Can school cause depression? Can school cause mental illness? Talking about colleges and safe spaces. There's a book coming out dealing with social media and smartphones and taking phones away from kids. But also, we've talked about before, the drugs that kids are put on for ADHD, et cetera. And here's a warning article about the shortage of those medications and what impact is that going to have on mental health. So I think that besides, addressing, mental health in a curriculum, I think the system has to take a look inwards as well.
Further discussion, Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to heavily agree with what Rep. Cordelli just said. And I think we actually need to rewind this all the way to the beginning, not just to this bill, but even to this 2003 outline. And we have to ask ourselves also a fundamental question, because the premise is seemingly assumed that public schools can and should be doing something to solve this problem. And I think we need to actually tease out that argument. Is that something that needs to be done at public schools? And to offer just one anecdote toward that, we heard moving testimony from a young lady last session, right here, who testified not specifically to mental health. She was testifying on civics, but she testified to her mental health difficulties that were breaking her down as a student. She nearly cried in testimony. And the reason that she was doing that, and because she made this very explicit, was that the problems of the world, from climate change to racism, were on her shoulders. And she learned this in public school. So we need to take a real hard look inward and see, are we putting the problems of the world on teenagers and asking them to solve these problems? Because that isn't something that should be their job right now.
Representative Cascade.
That's why parents have choice.
Representative Damon.
I just want to observe that while mental health education is in the 18910, and helpful to have that handout in front of us, thank you. Quite frankly, I am not confident that in our present process in education in New Hampshire through DOE, that if mental health is not included in the RSA as a topic of education, that it will stay in the 306 rules. And therefore, I vigorously support that it be included as a law that we provide mental health education.
That's one of the reasons why we have the ED 306 rules, the draft rules, a session for us to look at and discuss here, because that is one of the components which is stripped from the proposed rules. 306.40 is those elements of mental health, nutrition, and all that come underneath health education are gone. That's the same thing in social studies and science and all that. The elements within those topical subject areas are gone. Well, so they're gone from rule. Then where is there any reference to that in statute? Well, we have in statute already where it references health and interpersonal relationships. Health meaning, well, what is health? And then we go to 306 and we gave rulemaking authority to the state board and they defined what health was. They've approved that in their framework and their academic standards. And so somewhere along the way, I think we need to have health education specified in statute, if not in mental health, which is a component within health. I have no problem with that either. But we have a lot of areas within health education, and we've addressed some of them. Substance abuse, that's in underneath studies right now. The difference between this bill and the next bill, which we discuss, is that one of them is looking at putting language in the studies, 189. The other is looking at 193, adequate education, where health education already is in law. So I guess that's what we got to really be focused on now is, and the word comprehensive, is comprehensive out? Is that all out right there? Do we need it? That's the question I would ask the committee here. Any takers? No. Representative Cascade.
I agree. The adequate education standards includes health.
Yes.
Health includes
Health and
mental health.
wellness. And then it makes a reference to the substance abuse stuff as an RSA, following that under the adequacy 193E. But then if we take it out of 306, see, there's no backup for mental health. I think that you're correct. I think it should be left in the rules. Representative Lekis.
I've been puzzled by this all along because trying to parse this, it talks about all these things that need to be taught to pupils, and then it goes on as they relate to the effects of alcohol and sexual violence and whatever. And are we only teaching those as they relate to those things, or should we be teaching as well the effects of alcohol and other drugs? Because I don't know, maybe it's me, but the way I'm reading it, it seems because it says as they relate to means the things before that are taught as they relate to the things after that. And I don't think, was that what was intended? I mean,
If
when
you
this
look at
part
the
was
sheet
put in,
that Jen did for us, you're going to see one of the areas, health education, as it relates to the effects of alcohol and drugs.
right.
We have 233 schools responding, yes, we do it. And we have 14 schools saying, no, we don't.
So my question is, was this put in to say that these things need to be, that the focus was alcohol and drugs, sexual violence, that, you know, the things that it's talking as they relate to, and the idea of the things being taught, physiology, hygiene, etc., is someplace else. And this bill was just saying that we also have to be and use those things to teach the effects of alcohol and drugs, etc. So why was this originally put into law, and what was the point? Because it seems to me in reading it, the point was dealing with alcohol, drugs, child abuse, HIV, etc. And it seems like those other things show up elsewhere as teaching them and are only mentioned here as the way, as what we're using to point out these other things. So it's a question. I don't know. Please explain.
Representative Petronell, and then Representative Cordial.
Thank you. As we're looking at this, I remember when we had this first hearing, and this whole section, 189:10, Roman numeral 2, really needs an entire revision because it's like a dumping ground for the latest health issue of the day. And I think we could tighten that up so that it encompasses a lot more in broader language in one section rather than starting to delineate each and every single malady as it comes across the legislature.
That's a cleanup that if you knew the folks that were in OLS prior, when Anthony was there, this is an echo. You just echoed what Anthony was saying, that we either put a subject area in under adequacy or you dump it into studies. And that's something that has to be answered because we've sort of been dumping in both places. And every time you enter something into adequacy, you're talking about the requirement for funding that as well. So we dump it into studies. And like personal finance literacy, we did that, and you mesh it either into your course of economics you're teaching or into the classroom in the grade schools, or you teach it as a separate class. So it's an age-old issue you address. Yes, Representative Cordial.
Well, I think grammatically it's just a mess because now I see what you're saying. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know if it's a misplaced modifier or what, but when you get to the end, it does sound like the whole list is only in its relationship to the effects of alcohol and other drugs, and I don't think that's what was intended, but the way I could see where it's very confusing. So it seems like one of the things that you need to address is alcohol and drugs, but that's separate. But, so anyway, yeah, grammatically messed too.
Yeah. Further discussion on this bill? Yes.
Thank you. So I don't know if this is an appropriate request, but I would wonder if we could maybe do a straw poll of if the word comprehensive was removed, but the words mental health education were inserted. So right now, all the bill does is put those 4 words in.
Inserting which now?
No, removing the words comprehensive.
Yeah.
And leaving mental health education.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if I could get some feedback on how people would perceive it in the absence of the word comprehensive.
Okay, tagging in on that, and then Representative Hall. If you look at the ED 306 rules right now, and it'd be Section 2, which I'm looking at, it identifies a planned K through 12 curriculum in health education designed to teach the skills listed in the above across the following content areas of health education. A through I. Are we supposed to, now, remember, this is rules. So we tell the rules what rules should be. But if we were to put everything that's in rule into statute, it'd be a whole lot more than just, it would be alcohol and drug use prevention, injury prevention, nutrition, physical activity, family life and comprehensive sexuality education, tobacco use prevention, mental health, personal consumer health, community and environmental health. Should we list all those under studies? Well, I'm asking anybody here. It goes back to what Representative Petronell was just saying. Do we dump it there, or we just go with the definition of health education and give rulemaking authority to the department, State Board of Education, to define those elements which are within what are the academic standards for those, and it's also within minimum school standards for public school approval, which are these rules. Representative Dry.
Thank you. Following up on that, I just like page 10 in there, this is the national standards, right? Page 10 in the health education curriculum. This is what I think the national education standards are thinking when they think about health. And I think that everything you talked about is in here, but not necessarily has to be in statute.
And see, those what you're looking at were the old frameworks which gave guidance to how to teach towards those academic standards for all these subject areas. That's the way we did it. But we don't have frameworks anymore within statute. They're gone. Yes. Representative Hall, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I would like to answer Representative Damon's question, actually. I think comprehensive is the intent of the bill. I think if you take out comprehensive, go back to what we have. So I remember the testimony, it was all about this, calling it comprehensive, that it's all encompassing all the new stuff out there and whatnot. Okay, you're welcome.
And do we go and write a definition for comprehensive mental health? Would we borrow, for example, from that Texas definition, which then later on gets into even the 3-tier system, MTSS? Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the Texas information you provided is more than education. It's systems. So those 5 bullet points at the top of the second page, not all of that is education. So that's more than what I perceive this bill proposing to do.
I agree. But that's part of something that schools do. They do provide assistance and direction.
I'm not saying they shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I'm just differentiating it from what I think the intent of this bill is.
And it goes on and says, comprehensive school mental health systems support the safety, academic success, and well-being of students. Do we need all that language in statute, or is that part of rulemaking?
That's my thing, Rick.
Yes, Representative Lucas.
I think if we just leave all this up to rulemaking and we don't give some direction, we basically left it wide open. If we just say mental health, you decide what it is, we're not giving any direction, and it could be anything depending upon who's writing the rules at any particular time. And I kind of don't see that as something we should be doing.
But if you get specific, remember, we don't write curriculum. We don't control instruction. That is a local education agency responsibility.
But is curriculum, what is exactly curriculum? Because I've been reading all of 306, and it seems like there's an awful lot of stuff. It seems like there's a big disagreement here between what curriculum is, because 306 tells all kinds of things, goes into all kinds of details that we always say, oh, we shouldn't be doing because that's curriculum. But 306 isn't local either. It's the state telling the towns what to do. So where is that line between what the state should be telling them and what they should be deciding? Because
In the
306
past,
is full of
Representative,
lots of details.
the state has given guidance through the curriculum frameworks, which incorporate the academic standards. Now, we may say some things in the academic or curriculum frameworks that you're going to teach about Thomas Jefferson. Every school may not teach about Thomas Jefferson, but they're going to teach that academic standards through maybe some different approach of doing that. So I just took an off-the-wall type, So I think we made a mistake as a legislator, and I was the one who's probably pushing this because the statewide assessment wasn't measuring a lot of this stuff. We took curriculum frameworks out of law. And I've introduced legislation, again, putting it back in this go-around and putting curriculum frameworks back in as a guidance. And, we're not telling what their curriculum instruction is going to be, but we're giving guidance. This is how we incorporate academic standards into what we're doing. If we don't have something such as that, how do teachers know what I should be doing or shouldn't be doing? So I don't know. I'm not really supportive of the word comprehensive. I'm supportive of the word mental health being in law. It's just another laundry list of an element within health that we already have. And so if something comes out of 306, we have it where you are going to be teaching it because it's in statute. Further discussion. Representative
It
Cordial.
already says health. It says, line 5, health, hygiene, health, and interpersonal relationships. It doesn't say physical health. It just says health. I don't see the need for any addition.
Okay. Representative Cascadden.
When I'm looking at both of these, the 151? Can't remember. And the 505.
Yeah.
I think that it doesn't need to be in statute because it's already addressed. I think the best place to specifically identify mental health skills is in the rulemaking that describes what components schools need to have. When I'm looking at the Texas one, promote a positive school climate, teach and support skills for social, emotional, behavioral needs. And, most schools have social, emotional learning going on. Prevent mental health and substance use problems. How can they intervene? Provide access to school-based and community-based interventions and supports to students and families. And I would see that in a rule-making description of mental health or behavioral health. Because once you start listing all of the different components like bullying, cyberbullying, panic attacks, depression, I mean, something else is gonna come up and it's not gonna be in the list. I think it's risky to list all of those things. Because it could be, again, a post-traumatic disorder. It could be living in toxic stress. A lot of kids live in that environment. It could be the parents that have the mental health issue and the student doesn't know how to deal with it. I just worry that by listing all of those pieces, we're too boxed in terms of a law. But if you have some regulated structures within a school of what needs to exist, and again, 10, 15 years ago, that's how positive behavior intervention supports came about. Over time, I've seen behavioral specialists added to school personnel. I've seen ed assistants trained in ABA, which is behavioral management from cognitive behavioral theory. I've seen student support centers grow in place of detention halls. And those all address how kids adapt and behave in school. So I'd like to see it in rulemaking that would include staff professional development, not in a statute. I think mental health covers it enough because a statute, in my mind, should be broad. And then the 306s should be a little bit more descriptive. And then the district identifies what works for them.
So are you nailing this down? So you think that rather than comprehensive mental health, it should be just mental health in statute? Or are you saying it should be just health and how we regulate this? We don't have regulations, feds do, but how we we put into rulemaking what health education is. We don't do that though. The state board does that.
I worry about a statute specifically identifying mental health. Is the perception of mental health something that's diagnosed in the DSM manual? Or does it also include other disorders, ADHD, behavioral, social, bullying is a social, behavior? Does mental health pocket it too much versus health? Because it's all of these list of things in this draft bill, talks about biological, social, environmental influences on mental health disorders, anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive. There's a whole list of things. Are
you looking at the rules right now?
I'm looking at the draft 151.
Oh, you're looking at 151?
Yeah, that's the other bill
That's the other
we
one.
haven't talked about yet.
Okay.
I think I would be worried that something would be missing from that.
Okay, Representative Petronell.
I agree with you, Representative Cascadden. I think the danger with 151 is that this is going to become another dumping ground like the studies. You're just going to keep adding items to the list each year as some new malady du jour appears.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Just to add to that, what I find is the stumbling block is that some parents are not cooperative with trying to get treatment for their kids. Not all parents, but occasionally you get parents that really don't want you to know what's really going on. If your parents are drug dealers, they'll do anything to they'll go to open house and put on a nice face. But deep down, when that kid comes and he's pretty sullen, that parent doesn't want you to dig into the behaviors of that kid. And that's the challenge. That is a challenge. But I'd be curious to know how many schools are not really engaged in some of these structures as a whole school. And I don't know if Office of Student
That
Wellness
survey will
have
show
that.
you some of that information.
It did show some, but it did not.
Not all of it.
Yeah, there are some topics here that that would be interesting to see. I mean, because you don't want to stigmatize kids because it's not their fault.
Yes, Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It was mentioned earlier that we should be a bit introspective and look at what has been done in the past and why students might be having some mental health problems. On that note, I would look to the Health Education Curriculum Guidelines from New Hampshire from 2003, page 117. Left-hand side, items 3.8, 3.9, and 3.10. This is middle school curriculum. How to advocate for needs and rights of others, how to advocate for a healthy social environment, how to advocate for fairness. And over on the other side, it says students must show awareness of audience and demonstrate passion and conviction. In other words, we have had guidelines for middle schools for 20 years in this state to train students as social activists in schools. Maybe we should look at that.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, wait a minute.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I can't let that go. To try to provide awareness for students is not training them to be activists. And I object to the accusation that's what's happening in schools.
Well, just to follow up where you are, Representative Myler, give you an example that occurred 3 days ago or 4 days ago, last Friday. Our kindergarten grandson was again put in the thinking chair. And the thinking chair in the kindergarten class is where you think about what choice you just made. It's a way of addressing an issue, and that was the second time he'd been in the thinking chair in the last 3 days. And he came back and explained it to us, and he's the youngest one in the class, but he's also the largest one in the kindergarten class. Birthday just this last month. So that was something the teacher has responsibility for teaching. You don't start laughing out loud at somebody else. You think about and you make that choice. But his response was, well, so-and-so made me do that. He has to learn that that comes from inside. You do it yourself. So I think that's part of what a teacher teaches in kindergarten. Everything you know in life, you learn in kindergarten. And so I think that teachers all the way through these grades has that responsibility. Only you magnify it a little bit more as you get up in the grades. But I just don't know how quite to do this. I don't mind putting mental health in, but I can't do comprehensive.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So
We're getting close to the end of the time.
Yeah. What you just talked about there, though, isn't that what comprehensive means? I mean, looking at, this isn't my area. So the stuff that that's been discussed in the handouts that that came out, I think, are very informative. But when you take a look at Texas and you take a look at the New Hampshire standard from 2003, there's action elements to that, like what you were just talking about happened to your grandson in kindergarten, but going right through elementary and middle school and high school, it's not just mental health education. It's not, this is what the technical definition of ADHD or the technical definition of different mental health disorders. I don't think that's what this is getting at. And the bill sponsor is here. And
Which bill are you talking about?
the 150
505?
505.
Yeah, okay.
And the one you were just referring to with the word comprehensive in there. But I'm taking that to mean, at least based on the bill language, the what you handed out from Texas, Florida, as well as the New Hampshire standards from 2003, that goes beyond sort of like clinical definitions of mental health conditions and diagnoses, but more of what to look for in yourself, what to look for in your friends, what you were just talking about with your grandson, you know, it comes from within, how to seek help. You know, so it's not self-diagnosis, it's not medical school. And I don't know, maybe Representative Newell can shed some light on the intent of this.
Well, we got a few hands up right now. Representative Petronell and then Representative Tanner. Go ahead.
We've had other pieces of legislation come across our desks, if you will, that the argument has been that adding curriculum to our legislation adds a burden to teachers. And we've been told that we should trust teachers. So I would argue that we should keep the legislation on the simpler side, where it already is, without adding either of these bills to the RSAs, and that we should trust the teachers that they are acting within the guidelines and teaching within the guidelines of what they've been told to do and what they think is right.
If we do as you're saying, should we then communicate with the state board when they come in here with 306, saying, are you going to strip it out of the ED 306 rules? If you're going to strip it out of 306 rules, and they have that ability to do that, certainly then, if we feel that this should be taught, then why wouldn't we stick it in statute?
It should stay in the, it should be, it could be more clearly defined in the rules. That's what they're for, right?
If they're willing to do that. Representative Tanner.
As I look at this, and I'm thinking, what if this bill came through and it said comprehensive physical education or comprehensive hygiene? And it doesn't make kind of sense to me. So I know that comprehensive means all encompassing, and certainly Representative Cascadden has talked about how mental health really has to be a continuum of not only education but services. I think that if we took comprehensive out of there, that I certainly could support this bill to have mental health education, simply because it's drawing attention to that issue that's so critical right now. That's why AIDS was put in there. AIDS was put in there because in 2003, when this was developed, it was the leading cause of death. And thankfully it isn't now. As I said, I would go with this bill taking
I
comprehensive
tend to
out.
agree with you, Representative Tanner. You know, you teach physical education. But, you know, I could also take devil's advocate and go to the other side and say, look at AD 306. It talks about comprehensive guidance and counseling service, or, yeah, a comprehensive guidance and counseling program. You could just say a guidance and counseling program, probably get the same thing. You know, comprehensive is, yeah, define it for me. We're getting close to Representative Damon.
Thank you. So two things. I really think it is very important that we specify mental health. When you simply say health, it is not commonly perceived to go beyond physical health. And we've had that come up in committee on other bills, and I have remarked, as I have in many circumstances over the years, I wish that mental health were automatically included in the umbrella under health, because the brain's an organ and the heart's an organ and it's all connected. Why do we distinguish between conditions that affect the mind versus the rest of the body? But we do, as a society, distinguish that all the time in all kinds of contexts. So I don't think if we leave it as health that we are being adequate at all to our students. I think we need to say mental health. Separately but related, I feel a responsibility to the many people that I know personally and professionally over the years who have experienced mental illness. And I would request that we not call these conditions the malady du jour. I think it makes light of things that are very challenging for people to deal with. And I needed to say that. Thank you.
Well, I think by the last comment, there are a lot of elements or components underneath health. And that was the reference to all those components. So if they're going to define it and have it in rules, I'm good with it being there. But if they don't, I'm good with putting mental health in studies. Not comprehensive mental health. Now, we're right now at 12:05, and we do have another one starting at 1 o'clock, but I think we're a little closer of understanding what we've got here in front of us. The third bill, which we really didn't talk a lot, talks about putting this into adequacy. And I think that's really dangerous. I think it needs to be, if it's going to be in statute, it has to be somewhere else in statute, like studies. Any further comments for today on this one? So we will meet again in October. What was the date? October 12th, right. October 12th. So, yeah, so if you have something that you'd like to see the bill tweaked a little bit, come in with some bullet points or something such as that, which we might be able to look at the next meeting. Remember, we have to make this decision by November. We're not voting on any, well, no. As a subcommittee, we could vote any time to make a recommendation to the Education Committee. We are the committee of the whole right now, even though we're the same people. Yeah, okay? Okay, Representative Damon.
I just wondered if in the scheduling, was it noted that Friday the 6th is the Friday of Columbus Day weekend? And whether that is relevant to other folks or not, I think there's competing priorities for some.
All right, Representative
No, I
Hall.
was gonna say, it's also a no school day for many, many schools because of professional development. That's the day of the NEA instructional conference, I believe. Yes. On that Friday, the 6th, it's the day of the instructional conference, so a lot of kids aren't in school that day. Thought.
The 10th is, the 6th is a what? October 6th? Is that a Friday? Well, we could move that to the 5th. We could move them all to the 5th.
Very much appreciate.
Okay, that's good. That's good input. You're welcome.
So we're gonna do that to the 5th?
You know, talking about Columbus Day, up in the district where my kids are going to school, one school doesn't recognize it as Columbus Day. It's Indigenous Day. The other, the school district itself and another school recognizes it as Columbus Day. So internally within the district, they can't even get their act together. So
we're gonna move that to the 5th?
to the 5th. It'd be October 5th. All those scheduled for the 6th are now the October 5th. Good? Yeah, I put myself on it. But, you know, if on the subcommittee, if you're not going to be there, you can tell Mel, put somebody else on there. On the subcommittee, he can do that. Yeah. We're all done. We're all done. Thank you.